Welcome back to College Football Addiction, a video many of you never thought that I would do. Now, let's not take ourselves so seriously in this video. Please don't get offended by things that are said about college football. But whether you like this or hate it, Lane Kiffin ended up being right. There has been so much talk about who deserved to get in, who deserved to be in the playoff, who got snubbed, who had a stronger strength of schedule, who had more quality wins, who have they played, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We've made jokes about Herbstreit. We've made jokes about Feinbaum. And of course, we fired jabs at Lane Kiffin's Twitter fingers. But Lane Kiffin was right about the playoff. Do you remember his tweets? Notre Dame was up 17-3 on Indiana, and at that moment, he tweeted, "Really exciting, competitive at college football playoff game." And he obviously included the monocle emoji and said, "Great job," with a couple of exclamation points. During the Penn State game against SMU, he tweeted, "Way to keep us on the edge of our seats, committee, ... riveting." Now, surprisingly, later on, that weekend, Lane wasn't tweeting as much while Tennessee got beat down by Ohio State. Now, Tennessee from the mighty SEC, the team that actually had the best odds per Vegas on the road to win their first round game, and then ended up losing in the most embarrassing fashion possible. Maybe Lane was just out to dinner or something then. He may not have seen that when it was happening. But Lane also didn't have much to say when South Carolina lost as a 2-score favorite, or when Alabama lost as a 2-touchdown favorite. Again, maybe though he was just out in Jacksonville enjoying the sights before his bowl game. And then we got to the playoff quarterfinals. Now, hypothetically speaking, UGA had a strength of schedule, everyone's favorite metric this year. They had a strength of schedule of 1. Notre Dame's strength of schedule was 44th. UGA always finds a way to win the big game. Notre Dame always blows the big game. Kirby can't be outcoached. And hypothetically speaking, this was primed for Georgia to be back in the national championship. Had they won against Notre Dame, they certainly would have been a favorite against Penn State as well. But somehow, all of those things, all of those hypotheticals ended up going the other way. And Notre Dame did win a game that they weren't supposed to win. And they won in a game that Georgia wasn't very competitive in. Now, I understand the garbage time touchdowns that happened late in the Indiana game, but the irony is when Lane was tweeting about the game being far less competitive or not very competitive at all, they ended up losing by less than Georgia did to Notre Dame. Unfortunately, Lane, though, probably busy with his game, just didn't have time to tweet about that. Texas was favored by the most in both of the first 2 rounds of the college football playoff. And in both rounds of the 4 games that happened, they had the most underwhelming win. Their game against Clemson was not overly impressive. Now, they did what they needed to do, and they won and they covered. But their second round game against Arizona State, a team that many said really shouldn't even have had a bye, needed overtime, needed a favorable call or two to go their way. And I know Texas fans, there were favorable calls that went to Arizona State as well. We're not rehashing that. But just from a grand scheme of things, unfortunately, Lane didn't find the time to tweet about those things. So he's been right, though, when he has been tweeting. Lane went out last night and beat the absolute tar out of a Duke team that was playing their 3rd-string quarterback and had a ton of guys out on defense. He absolutely made a statement, beating the crap out of a very depleted Duke Blue Devils squad. As a 17-point favorite, they covered. As you guys watched the Gator Bowl, wasn't your first thought, wow, this Ole Miss team definitely deserved to be in? Lane had some comments after the game about how tough the SEC is and how playing 6-6 teams there is just different. You may have already seen the clip. It's about a minute long, so if you want to fast forward, great. If not, take a listen.
It's why it's just different. It's just totally different. And these comparisons of other conferences and ACC and Big 12, I mean, it's just like, you might as well be in different leagues, not conferences, different leagues. You know, like here's the NFL, here's the SEC, here's those few Big 10 teams, and then here's everybody else. So you're going to see it in the draft. You know, it'll be different, like it always is with the SEC, the amount of kids drafted out of here and there. And so it's really a bad system. Here you go. You got me going. It's just a bad system. It's a bad system, and you got people in there in place of it. And I don't know. They gave me the list of the coaches today. You know, I mean, those coaches ever been down here in the deep South into these stadiums and played in these games that are on this? So how do they even know? How do they even know what it's like to have to go win in these stadiums, in these places, and on the road of teams that they say, well, these teams are 500 teams, and we have, you know, the week where the three favorites all lose on, you know, the senior day and night in three of the hardest stadiums in America to play. It's much different than where these other conferences go and play their, you know, 6-6 teams that they got to go play, or 5-5 teams at the time. It's totally different. And you got to get up for it every week. It's a lot easier when you got to get up for 2 games a year, you know, to get your team up.
So the implication here is obviously talking about the 500 teams in the SEC being so much better than everyone else's 500 teams. And again, I'm going to agree with Lane here. I do think that most of the 500 teams in the SEC are probably slightly better than most of the 500 teams elsewhere. That's just probably true. Although Georgia Tech at 7-5 took Georgia to 8 overtimes, a fully healthy Georgia with Carson Beck. I know they had injuries and bang-ups, and so I won't say fully healthy, but a reasonably healthy Georgia team. And that was about a 500 team in the ACC. I don't know what Georgia State's final record was, but I know they took a 6-6 Vandy to the wire and beat them. I know that other teams in other conferences that had okay records too were very competitive against those teams. But I'll agree with Lane. But the implication is about Oklahoma and Vandy and Florida and these average teams, these 6-6 or 7-5 teams, and how hard it is to beat them compared to everyone else's 6-6 teams. I also thought it was funny how he said it's the NFL, the SEC, a couple of Big Ten teams, and everybody else. So the entire SEC is above a couple of Big Ten teams? Well, tell Ohio State that after what they did to Tennessee. Tell Miami that after what they did to Florida. Tell anyone else that beat an SEC team that it doesn't matter. The entire SEC is above everyone. It doesn't matter. Although right now we have one SEC team left in the playoff of 4. So somehow other teams found a way to beat the mighty SEC. I know that Texas, Miami, and A&M didn't have much trouble with 7-5 Florida. I know that South Carolina, Texas, and LSU didn't have much trouble with Oklahoma. Georgia State didn't have any trouble with Vandy. And Kentucky, that Ole Miss lost to, literally no other SEC team had a problem with them. They won one SEC game. I don't know, man. The logic doesn't seem to add up there. It doesn't seem to hold up. Here's where I'll agree with Lane. I do think that week in and week out, the SEC is the toughest conference. I will fully agree with that. Even this year, are there more competitive teams in the SEC than anywhere else? Yes. Top to bottom, it is a tougher league. But is there more talent from top to bottom? Yes. Again, I'll agree with Lane. He's right. The NFL draft will prove that. There will be more guys taken from the SEC than anywhere else. But that's where it ends. You can have all the talent in the world that you want. You can have all the recruits in the world that you want. You can send as many guys to the NFL as you want. But you can't lose to bad teams in your conference and then shout about how you deserve everything. If you can't beat the bad teams in your conference, you don't deserve the chance to go and compete against the best teams in the country. If you have multiple bad losses, that's the end of the conversation. The SEC's bell cow was UGA, and they weren't competitive against Notre Dame yesterday. Let's do a better job moving forward of leaving the strength of schedule and the hypothetical conversations in 2024 and just watch football. Nobody really thought that Alabama could compete for a national title. Nobody really thought that South Carolina or Ole Miss would compete for a national title. The only team left in the SEC is the biggest underdog of the remaining teams, and they were in the Big 12 just 8 months ago, a conference they failed to win 10 of the last 12 seasons. Lane is right. Hypothetically, the SEC is always the best. Lane nailed it. When you look at talent, when you look at recruiting, when you look at draft results, when you look at top to bottom, Lane's spot on. The SEC is the best, hypothetically. But they weren't the best this season. They weren't the best this year. And if Ohio State does what many think they will, it's going to get proven before we even get to the national title game. A national title game that will not include an SEC team. What are your thoughts about Lane? How long do you think he keeps this going on? We're going to keep, people might say the same thing about me. Well, you're still talking about it. Yes, we will talk about it as long as the major voices in college football continue to bring this up. But how long do you think a coach of a team that significantly underwhelmed, a team that significantly underperformed their expectations, not just our expectations of them, not just Vegas's expectations of them, but their own expectations? Jackson Dart was a Heisman Trophy candidate to start this season. And they lost 3 inexcusable games this year. How long do you think Lane keeps it going on? What are your thoughts on this? As always, talk about it with me down in the comments. I appreciate you guys as always tuning in. It is fun to look at, but hypothetically, Lane is right. As always, appreciate you guys for watching College Football Addiction. Make sure you're subscribed if you're not already. We'll talk to you guys soon.